ticket log.
You did?
Because I know it takes a second to fire up. And I wanted to make sure everything was good, so I've been on the channel.
Okay. Awesome.
Smooth.
Okay, I'll let Harrison know. He said he had some plans to.
Yep, they should be able to get right on it. We have 6 people watching. But one, well, and they're hearing everything we're saying.
Good evening. My name is Jenny Green, and I serve as the director. And as a department, we work to provide a comprehensive curriculum in grades 6 through 12, but in addition, we also provide programming for the Baylor community and beyond. At all levels, the health and well-being of our school. Administration, Parent Alliance, and both middle and upper school divisions have generously given additional resources, support, and much guidance in education, programming, and speakers like the speaker we are fortunate to hear from tonight. Before introducing our speaker, though, I want to acknowledge a few of my colleagues. Rochelle Parman in the back. Rochelle teaches wellness in the upper school and is also my partner in crime, assisting with health and wellness programming. And then our counselors here at Baylor, both in the upper school and middle school. Starting with the upper school, the director of counseling, Kathy Fraley, Becky Williams, Carissa Margio, upper school, and then in the middle school, the director of student support, Christy Tomasek, and counselor Lizzie Gendomenico. They have partnered with us to highlight mental health awareness. It is thanks to them that our students, faculty, and staff have an opportunity to participate in activities related to mental health topics each day throughout this week. And also, I want to mention tonight, directly following the Q&A, after Ross's presentation, they will make themselves available for a few minutes if you want to come and meet one of them. It is now my privilege to introduce the speaker for our third event in the Surviving a Teen Years series. Ross Sabo, a leader in the world of adolescent mental health, is currently the Wellness Director for Geffen Academy at UCLA. He is also the CEO of the Human Power Project, a company that creates cutting-edge mental health curriculum. He is also an award-winning speaker, author, and consultant. Ross was formerly the Director of National Mental Health Awareness Campaign for 8 years. In that time, he spoke to over 1 million people and wrote a book titled Behind Happy Faces. But after 8 years on the road, Ross was burned out. So he did what anybody would do when they're exhausted. He joined the Peace Corps and spent 2 years in Botswana. His own company in an effort to create mental health curriculum for people of all ages. His first curriculum, which is also titled Behind Happy Faces, is now being used by over 200,000. Ross is a social pioneer and a leader in the mental health field. I am thankful for this opportunity for us all to hear from him today. Please join me in giving him a warm Baylor welcome.
My third presentation today. I fit in a trip to Sugars in between and made sure I ate it in time to speak. I used to make that mistake when I was younger. I'd go eat like a lot of ribs and food right before I spoke and not have any gap and then just stand up and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I ate your food. But I had a really great day here. The students were really receptive. We had some really good conversations. Really helpful to frame mental health from a different perspective. And that's really what we're going to do tonight, is just talk about a lot of different aspects of mental health. Tonight's presentation will be similar to the presentation that your kids saw. That is by design, so that you can all speak the same language. I will go a little bit more into my experience with my family and kind of what worked and didn't work, because kids don't really care about what parents have to go through. So we'll go into that a little bit more. The biggest challenge I have whenever I stand up in front of any audience and say I'm going to talk about mental health is that all of you have different ideas of what that means. From a societal perspective, when we talk about mental health, or if you Google mental health, these are the typical images that come up. So the images behind me are celebrity breakdowns, headlines about school shootings, people looking angry, sad, lonely, scared, and the biggest challenge is that when you see them sitting in this audience, none of you look at these images and think, I want to have mental health. And I think what is really lacking in today's society is for what mental health is. When we say physical health, almost everyone in this room does not think of things negative. If I said I was talking about physical health, you wouldn't be like, oh, so cancer and diabetes and heart problems and probably death and like all these negative things. But when I say mental health, you immediately think of, oh, okay, so this is for people with problems. The actual definition of mental health is not people who have problems. The actual definition of mental health is more similar to physical health. How you manage those problems, how you cope, how you take care of your brain, how you build skills, how you build relationships. And without a clear definition of mental health, we're really limited in how we can educate and always advocate for is in your homes, in your schools, in your jobs, in your marriages, in your relationships, have a clear definition of mental health that everyone knows. Otherwise, you can't talk about the same thing. What I'm a big proponent of, and what they do at Baylor, is they teach mental health the same way you would teach physical health. So not from a deficit approach, but from an approach of how do we build skills, how do we help people manage these things. And so whenever I stand up in front of an audience and say I'm going to talk about mental health, a lot of people wonder, like, why is this guy the spokesperson for mental health? He doesn't look like he has any issues. And that is pretty much the reason why. I always joke with people that, like, you don't have a perfect life and then decide like you want to be a mental health advocate. You know, like, oh man, my life's so great, I should tell people about it. Usually to get here, you have to experience a lot, and I have. I have a really intense personal story with mental health. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 16. When I was 17 and a senior in high school, I was hospitalized for attempting to take my own life. My challenges kind of grew from there. I went to college and had to leave because I had a relapse with bipolar disorder. I was in and out of psychiatric wards and other colleges for like 4 years, battling extreme substance abuse, before I really started finding a way to manage all of my issues around age 22. When I share my personal story, it's not to like depress you. I would never want any of you to leave this presentation tonight and be like, man, Ross's life really sucked. I guess I'll just go home now. That's not why we're here. I'm going to share a lot about my family and my personal story to get you to think about the decisions and the choices that you're making in your own lives. Outside of that, what we're going to do first is go over some research, what's happening in today's society, some other ways to promote mental health in a positive light and to normalize it. And then I'll share my personal story. And then I'll go over some tips for you as parents and really focus on coping mechanisms at the end. But I always like to begin this presentation with statistics. The statistics around mental health in this country are pretty alarming. 20 to 25% of young people have a diagnosable mental health disorder each year. Suicide is not the second leading cause of death for adolescents, but it is not nearly as much on the rise as it is for white males over the age of 45. The highest suicide rate in this country is adults. It is not teens, and it's not close. The suicide rate for adults has been steadily increasing over the past couple of decades, but increased significantly over the last decade. And I am going to balance statistics here just so I don't want you to think like, oh, it's kids who have all these problems. It's every age group right now. In the teen population, they feel overwhelmed, they're not sleeping. I think one of the challenges for mental health awareness, as someone who's run some of the largest mental health awareness campaigns, is when we run these campaigns and we share these statistics, there's an unintended effect that's kind of like letting everyone know that a lot of people are messed up. But when it comes to what we can do about it, in terms of mental health, we're often stuck saying, well, you need to talk to a therapist or talk to a counselor. But oftentimes that therapist or counselor in larger society doesn't exist. We didn't take this approach with physical health. So like, I would never say to all of you in this room from a public health approach, sit you down and be like, all right, here's the deal. You all have cancer, and you have diabetes, and you have heart problems, and you're all gonna die. And then when you were upset about that, you'd be like, oh my gosh, we're gonna die, what can I do? I'd say, well, you need to talk to someone. I was just here to tell you you're gonna die. I have no other information for you. But that is unintentionally what we do a lot of times with mental health awareness. With physical health, a public health approach to all of those things I just named, heart, cancer, diabetes, we went out and we taught people skills. So all of you know what you should eat, how you should exercise, how you should check your family history. And all of you have become so prepared that some people take really proactive ways to prevent cancer. If there's a gene in your family, people might get vasectomies. If there's a lot of prostate cancer, you might start getting checked much earlier than normal because you have that awareness. That's really where we need to move with mental health. We need to stop just going out and giving all these statistics and start teaching people actual skills that they can use. It works for physical health, it can work for mental health. What we're currently doing isn't working. The one statistic that is relevant, and the whole reason I actually started speaking, is that over 50% of people don't seek help for their mental health. So I always like to ask this question, why? Why is it that everyone in this room knows someone who's experiencing some kind of mental health challenge, but over 50% of people don't talk about it, won't seek help, won't tell anyone? And you can give the answers based on students or adults. It really isn't, really doesn't matter either way. So why don't we talk about mental health? Embarrassment? Yeah, and that embarrassment is for adults and kids. What else? Fear. And that fear is for everyone in every age group. What else? Don't know where to go or don't know what to say. Like I grew up in a family that never expressed emotions. So when I was in high school, people always be like, how do you feel? And I was like, I don't actually know. I don't know how to say it. What else? So stigma, which is kind of judgments and stereotypes, that if you do share something, no matter what age you are, people could look at you differently. Somebody else say something? Yeah, a lot of people don't feel like there is something that can help them. Anything else? I think the two big ones I didn't hear are, it's a sign of weakness, why don't you suck it up? Why don't you deal with it on your own? Why are you crying? And another one is trust. By the time students get to middle school, their trust has been broken so severely that they may not even feel like they can talk about what they're going through. The reason we start with this question is because this really is step A in changing the way we deal with mental health. A lot of people think diagnosis and treatment is the beginning, and those things are vital, and I would never say they're not. But I had a diagnosis, and I had access to the best treatment in the country, and I wasn't compliant with it because I felt stupid and weird and weak and embarrassed and ashamed. And I thought my problems should just go away on their own, and I thought I should just suck it up and get through it. And until I actually addressed those things, I wasn't able to get help. So if you really want to make a difference in your families, in your community, in this school, you have to start with a definition of what mental health actually is, and then break down these barriers about why the next couple steps get really challenging. So in your own families, having a conversation about why it's important to talk about mental health and modeling that behavior is going to be crucial, especially if you come from families that have a history of mental health disorders and addiction and other issues. So after you get a definition, after you break down barriers, you need an actual language to discuss mental health, and that's not always easy. One of the first things you're going to need to do is break mental health challenges into different categories. What I did up here is broke mental health challenges into 5 different categories. On the left are everyday challenges. These are things all of you go through. Next to that are environmental factors. So the home you were raised in, the school you go to, the way you grew up affects your mental health. Next to that are significant events. Next to that are mental health disorders. And next to that are developmental disabilities. All of you are aware of the different categories of physical health challenges. All of you know the difference between a sprained ankle and a broken ankle. You know the difference between having a cold and having the flu, unless you're male. Then it's all the same, and it's debilitating, and how could you possibly survive it? But all of you know the different categories for your physical health. We need to start teaching that there are different categories for mental health. If we don't, we end up in a world of confusion, where one kid goes through some stress and thinks it's the same thing as an anxiety disorder. Or another kid goes through a breakup and thinks it's the same thing as clinical depression. I can't tell you how many adults have come to me and said, well, when I went through my divorce, I didn't need medication. And I was like, well, you shouldn't. Just because you go through a divorce doesn't mean you have a mental health disorder. But that's kind of where we are, and it's because we treat mental health, everything's the same, and it's not. So it's important to have a vocabulary that distinguishes the difference. But the next thing we really need to do is change the entire way we frame mental health. Because the way that we frame mental health right now is kind of in this spectrum. Where on the left side, you have people who are sane or don't have mental health disorders. Then in the middle, you have mild mental health disorders. And then on the right, you have extreme mental health disorders. And this spectrum is broken for 2 really big reasons. Number one, you can have a severe mental health disorder like I do, and be sane at the same time. So if you're on 2 places in the same spectrum, the spectrum doesn't work. But the more dangerous thing that the spectrum does is it promotes the concept that these people need help, and everyone else is okay. If this was a physical health spectrum, the advice that doctors would be giving for decades is, you do not need to exercise until you get cancer. You do not need to eat healthily until you get diabetes. And that's not what we do. With physical health, we're proactive, we're preventative, and we normalize the concept that everyone has physical health and needs to be aware of it. So we need to do the same thing for mental health, and we can't do that with this spectrum. So we have to change the spectrum. The spectrum has to be more something like this. The definition of the balance would just be you being able to do the things that you typically do. Someone who's able to balance is just someone who doesn't have to think about their mental health much. They don't have a lot of stress, they don't have a lot of triggers, they don't have a lot of trauma. They kind of float through life and they really don't have to think about their mental health much. These are the people that I hate most in life. But they exist, so they get a place on the spectrum. Difficult to balance would be like, okay, I'm aware I have stress and triggers, but I'm not actively working on my mental health. This would be the equivalent of physical health, like the days where I'm like, I know I should go to the gym. I know I should exercise. I know I shouldn't eat these 6 donuts, but I'm just going to eat the donut. I'm not going to go to the gym. I'm having difficulty balancing and it's okay. Needing help or using help to balance your mental health could be someone in therapy, could be someone on treatment, but it could also just be someone who every day knows that they need to talk to someone, go for a walk, listen to music, follow a religion or pray. Somebody who needs to just do something every day to take care of their mental health. You don't need to have a mental health disorder to need help to balance your mental health, because mental health is not happiness. Needing constant assistance could be somebody in an outpatient treatment program, but needing constant assistance could be someone that all of you in your life have already helped. At some point between college and your life now, someone in your family or your friend went through something so severe that you decided you weren't going to let them be alone. You slept on their couch, you cooked them food, and you stayed with them for days or weeks until you felt like they could be alone again. And then not being able to balance could be someone who's suicidal, but it could also be someone who went through something so severe that no matter what they try, constant assistance or needing help, they just can't balance their mental health. And it has nothing to do with function. We got the chance to open this new school at UCLA. It's a school for students in grades 6 through 12, and I get to create a program of how we change the way to teach kids about their mental health. It's a dream job. It's been my entire life's work. It's been something I've always wanted to do. And 2 weeks before that school opened, my brother called and told me that my dad died. Now at the time, my dad wasn't sick. He was actually the healthiest person I knew. He rode his bike like 16 miles a day. He had no diagnoses. He was on no medication. And it's, to this day, the hardest news I've ever received in my life. So on one hand, I'm about to start a dream job that I've spent my entire life building. And on the other hand, I have to deal with the grief of losing my dad. And I am someone who always needs help to balance my mental health. But in seconds, I went from someone who just needs help to somebody who's unable to balance. And all of you in this room have had that experience. All of you in this room have received some kind of news that changes your place on this kind of spectrum instantly. I had to go home and deal with the funeral and the memorial and everything else, and then I came back right before school opened. And for the next 4 to 5 months, I could not balance my mental health. I still went to school every day and taught. I still finished my master's program. I still managed my marriage and everything else. But no matter what I tried, I couldn't balance my mental health. This mental health spectrum is not about judgment. It's not about looking at people and saying, oh, like, they need help and these people don't. This spectrum is about normalizing mental health for all. In the middle, because that's where it is for physical health. None of you in this room ever see someone leave a gym and think to yourself, oh, that's weird. They're not naturally thin and strong, they have to work at it. You see people leave a gym and you think like, oh, good for them. We need to get to a place in our society where we normalize mental health to the point where when you see someone taking care of themselves, you say good for them. And all of this is important because there are huge issues affecting young people today. Actually, people of every age. The first one is what I like to call a competition to see who can be more stressed out. So the way this sounds in high school is one person says, oh man, I didn't sleep last night. I have a test to study for. I have a paper I have to write. I'm not going to sleep tonight because my life is stressful. And the next student, instead of being like, oh, that really sucks, is like, no, I have 2 tests. I have 2 papers. I play 3 instruments and 4 sports. I just got a job to help feed my family. I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills. My life is harder than your life. That's what it sounds like for adolescents. But adolescents didn't make this up. They learned it from us. Because at all of our own jobs, we have a competition to see who's busier. Our conversations are about how much we're taking on, how busy we are, how stressful things are. So no matter what age you are, if you're having a competition to see who's more stressed out, please know this is a competition. Nobody actually wins. You don't win by being the most burned out person you know. You win by taking care of yourself. And what this really comes down to is that there's a huge difference between good stress and bad stress. Good stress motivates you. It activates your fight or flight mechanism. It helps you accomplish things and get things done. Bad stress is the opposite. It debilitates you. It's headaches, it's insomnia, it's body aches, it overwhelms you. The issue is when I say just the word stress to all of you in this room, how many of you immediately think of good stress? How many of you immediately think of bad stress? And when you start framing all stress as being bad, and you start doing that, and you start living that, and your kids and your kids' friends see it, that's what they think stress is. There's a really fascinating TED Talk called How to Make Stress Your Friend. Bad in their life, the higher rate of mental and physical health challenges they have. And there are tactics we can talk about. We can do it in the Q&A of how to just reframe bad stress to make it good. Because everyone in this room does experience good stress as well. It's just not as memorable. So what this leads to is one of the biggest challenges in our society, which is lack of sleep. I have a great saying up here: you don't have insomnia, you have a messed up sleeping pattern. I have two pictures of people asleep, and then a baby asleep on a pug. Why? Because it's adorable. The average college student in this country sleeps between 4 to 6 hours a night. When I asked this school how much they're sleeping, the average was 5 to 7 hours a night. Neuroscientists have found that the most effective way to break a human being down is to only let them sleep 3 to 5 hours a day. When militaries around the world capture prisoners of war, they only let them sleep 3 to 5 hours a day, which is exactly what college students are doing. Sleep is a really critical element of physical and mental health. And the reason I talk about stress and sleep is not because I have all the answers. It's because when I stand up in front of an audience and say, I'm going to talk about mental health, a lot of you thought, well, this isn't really for me. But if you're having a competition to say you're more stressed out, if you're not sleeping, mental health is for you. And I think one of the biggest things that we've learned over the past 15 to 20 years is more about neuroscience. I have a picture up here of the human brain as a computer. The human brain really is one of the most advanced computers that we have any knowledge of. We can't build a computer that does a tenth of what the human brain does. The issue is, before age 25, the human brain doesn't look like this. It looks more like this. It's wiring itself. It's forming habits, it's forming patterns, it's forming connections, it's forming coping mechanisms. And the patterns and habits and coping mechanisms that the human brain develops between the ages of 12 and 25 are often the patterns that stick for the rest of someone's life or for a really long time. The second largest period of brain growth in a human is between the ages of 12 and 25. But it's the only period of brain growth that we remember. People with Alzheimer's and dementia are more likely to remember experiences from this time frame than any other time period of their life because that brain growth is so strong. And I shared this element about brain development to just reinforce that mental health isn't something you do just when you have a problem. Mental health isn't something you try just when something's wrong. It's literally something that you have to wire and foster and grow like your physical health from a young age. And adolescents are much more prone to risk-taking than any other age group. The last part of the brain to fully mature is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is only responsible for things like emotional regulation, decision-making, planning, a lot of thought. And I joke with the students today, young women's brains mature between 22 and 25. Young men's brains mature somewhere between 25 and 40, depending on the male. No, they develop between 25 and 28. Young men's brains develop later. because young girls enter puberty sooner. It's not like a really big conspiracy theory. As those adolescent brains are developing, they're much more prone to taking risks than at any other age. As a parent, it's really important for you to channel those risk-taking opportunities into productive things. Iceland used to have the highest rate of substance abuse in their teens in the world. And they lessened it by just creating more opportunities for safe risk-taking. So rock climbing, skateboarding, dancing, all kinds of different opportunities where high-risk kids, martial arts, things like that, could channel their risk-taking into something productive. Low risk-taking adolescents are not removed from mental health challenges because a low risk-taking adolescent is more prone to shut down, more prone to drown themselves in substances, more prone to remove themselves. So if you know your kid is a high-risk taker, it's really important to put them into things that can match that dopamine release in their brain. If you know your kid is a low-risk taker, it's really important to make sure they don't numb or shut down and they engage with what is more introverted for them. Most of your kids are probably in the middle, which means you can expose them to both. But you do need to match their propensity for risk-taking with something that gives them that same release. Outside of that, I know we're moving quickly, there are two really big issues that keep coming up in our society. Everywhere I go in the world, people say to me, well, anxiety disorders and depression are at the highest rates we've ever seen, and that is possible. There are links to the digital age increasing rates of anxiety and mental health disorders. It's also possible that people don't know the difference between feeling nervous and having an actual anxiety disorder. Nervousness is the butterflies you get in your stomach before you're about to do something new, try something different, take a test, be evaluated in some way. Nervousness is short, it goes away. And anxiety disorder is that nervousness times 900 million. It's a physical reaction. It's feeling like the walls are caving in, you're having a heart attack, you're physically going to die. You can tell someone who's nervous to calm down. But someone who has an anxiety disorder, the opposite of that is not being calm, it's being able to see reality. Because anxiety strips you of that. And then the next issue is there's a huge difference between feeling depressed or upset or sad and having clinical depression. When you feel depressed or upset or sad, those are things that have an identifiable cause. There's a divorce in the family, someone dies, someone gets a bad grade, someone gets rejected, they can feel depressed or sad or upset, but they know why. And the opposite of feeling depressed is happiness. When you have depression, you don't have an identifiable cause. Everything sucks, everything hurts, and you don't know why. You stop doing the things you enjoy, you stop taking care of yourself, you may have thoughts of death and suicide for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but again, you don't know why. Or months at a time. The opposite of depression is not it's having the energy to do the things you normally do. So to talk to you more about depression, I'm going to share with you my personal story. I have a really interesting beginning to my personal story. I live in Los Angeles now. I didn't grow up in LA. I actually grew up in Pennsylvania. Growing up in Pennsylvania is not interesting. What is interesting is I was actually born in Bethlehem and raised in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. If you're not familiar with my home state, an hour north of Philadelphia are two towns, Bethlehem and Nazareth. The deal is Nazareth is a really small town and only has 2,000 people, so there's no hospital in Nazareth. So if you live in Nazareth and you're pregnant, your only hospital choice is Bethlehem. You have to go there, have your child, go back to Nazareth. Not on the map, but kind of like over in this region, if I could extend the map, is a town called Egypt. So you really could be born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth, go to Egypt if you need to. I use Google Maps now because I used to not use Google Maps, and somebody would always like rightly be offended and be like, hey, really love your presentation. I don't think that joke is funny, you're not mental health Jesus, and I never said that. I never hashtagged that. This is where I grew up, this is where my mental health issues started. And Pennsylvania has really strange town names. It's not just those three. On one road an hour south of Bethlehem, you can drive through Intercourse. and Middlesex, and Virginville, and the town next to Virginville is Blue Ball, Pennsylvania. Like, it is a strangely named state. And so, any story about mental health starts with a photo of a family. This is a really classic early 1980s photo of my family. There's a lot happening in this photo. What I love about it is my parents had like an actual conversation, like, what do you think we should wear this photo? And they came up with matching track jumpsuits and turtlenecks. My parents loved disco, so in the early 80s, my mom has just let out her perm. And then old photos like this, before the digital age, you could get a situation where we got the dog to look at the camera, but not my brother. And what I love about photos like this is all of you can look at this photo and project your own emotions into it. You can think of your own family members, your first family photo, what it was like. In this photo, I am the youngest of 3 boys being held by my dad. My oldest brother's 7 years older than me. My middle brother's 2.5 years older than me. But what this photo could never tell you is the story of the people in it. So as you look at this photo and you project whatever you want into it, you never know that my father was raised by a classic 1950s alcoholic. You never know that my dad was never hugged, that he was never told he was loved, that he never had a birthday party, that he never had a friend visit his house, that he wasn't allowed out of his yard, that he had no support from his family, and that he was often the victim of extreme physical violence, much like his mom, his brother, and his sister. And as you look at this photo, you never know that my mom grew up in a home with a mother who had a severe anxiety disorder and alcoholism, and a dad who had alcoholism, and that sometimes my mom came home to a really joyous place with music and baking, food, and sometimes she came home to a really dark place. When these two people got together, they did what most parents do. They had a conversation, and they decided that they would try and raise us differently. So my dad, who ended up with 3 boys, decided he would hug us every day. And he would tell us he loved us every day. And I can't remember a single sporting event from when I was 5 all the way to when I stopped playing sports that my dad wasn't on the sideline. Or a single speaking event when I started speaking around the country that was within 600 miles of him that he wasn't in the audience. And my mom made every effort she could to make sure that we had a stable home, that we didn't have the home she grew up in that was chaotic. And I can stand here in front of you and say that my parents did the absolute best job they could, because they changed what they knew 1,000,000%. But there's still gaps in that. And one of the biggest gaps is that they can't change their biology. And on both sides of our family, we have depression, anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, and severe addiction. So my parents did everything they could to give me the best childhood possible. My backyard was cornfields as far as the eye could see, and so we were outside all the time playing sports. We had camping trips. We went to the beach. We road tripped. We did everything that a kid could hope to do. And my life changed drastically when I turned 11. So this is me at 11. I'm now rocking a Michael Jordan t-shirt because the Sixers decided to trade Charles Barkley, and I'm so angry. My middle brother is on the left side here, and my oldest brother is in the middle. What we are doing in this photo is dropping my oldest brother off for his sophomore year of college at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. My oldest brother is extremely book smart. He's got a lot going for him in the book department. He is not very useful outside of books, but he's really great at books. He's so great at books that he graduated high school when he was 16, and he went to the University of Pennsylvania to major in physics. And he made it through his freshman year, and everything was great. We dropped him off in this photo in August of his sophomore year, and at the end of October, my dad got a call from the University of Pennsylvania Hospital saying that my brother had been determined to be a threat to himself and others and was hospitalized against his will, and that they needed my dad to come down immediately. My oldest brother has bipolar disorder, And he hadn't slept for about 7 days in kind of a manic high. He was walking around campus trying to teach classes, going into stairwells at night, singing loudly to hear the echo. And luckily, the counseling center assessed him and put him in a psychiatric ward. This was really just kind of the start of mental health fallout for my family. My oldest brother, luckily, was diagnosed quickly on his very first episode. And unbeknownst to all of us, my father was just always an insurance agent, life insurance agent for Prudential my entire life that he was working. And in the 80s, the late 80s, they had mental health coverage for their employees. So my brother got diagnosed early. We could afford treatment. And then what my brother also did was he accepted his diagnosis. He never drank, he never did drugs, and he never messed with his treatment. So my brother struggled. He was in the psychiatric ward for about 3 months. He came home. He was home for like 2 months. He went back for 3 months. He really was trying to find what worked for him. But he was able to return to college after taking a year off because all of those factors were there. Diagnosed immediately, can't afford help. If he accepted the diagnosis and he never messed with the treatment. If all 4 of those factors are there, you have a high chance for success. That's not my story, that's his story. My story in this is, I visited my oldest brother in a psychiatric ward in November, a couple weeks after he was hospitalized. 2 months after that, my grandmother died. 10 months after that, my best friend was killed in a car accident. And 2 months after that, my grandfather died. And so between the ages of 11 and 12, I was constantly being shuttled between the psychiatric ward, the hospitals because my grandparents were dying, and then going to the funeral of my grandmother, my best friend, and my grandfather. At age 11 and 12, no one ever sat me down and said, hey, how you cope is really important, so let's think about it and strategize. At age 11 and 12, I couldn't go to the hospital and the funerals and philosophize about life and death. But I could make people laugh. And I learned at a really young age that I had a talent to make people laugh in the worst situations. So that's what I did. I took a lot of pride in being able to bring joy and laughter to my family, but I never talked about my own feelings. I never talked about what I was going through. And then around age 12 or 13, I started drinking alcohol. Not all the time, obviously, but I was drinking alcohol probably 3 or 4 times a month. And I found that it really helped numb me and helped me escape. Now, what I didn't know at the time, obviously, was that my biology was set up for addiction. And that first drink I had at 12 was lighting up a slot machine of addiction that I was not aware of. Age of first use with alcohol really matters. 75% of addiction is from biology. And if you have your first drink under the age of 14, you're much more likely to develop a substance use disorder than someone who doesn't. Someone who doesn't have their first drink under 14. Under 18, it's even lower. And then over 24, even if you come from a family of addiction, because your brain's developed, you're not nearly as at risk for addiction. My first drink was at 12. My oldest brother's first drink was at 24. He's never experienced substance abuse. And I battled substance abuse for a really long time. But the thing I want to point out is that at age 11 and 12, I was already laying the pathways for how I was going to cope, not only through middle school, but also high school and college. There are interventions in schools that are effective during this time. Social emotional learning is basically emotional intelligence for kids. It teaches them how to name emotions, how to name feelings, how to name moods, how to share those things, how to evaluate them, how to normalize that. And mindfulness is a really amazing skill to help kids understand how to self-regulate, how to calm down, how to escape situations that are triggering. A lot of schools do this work. A lot of these programs are really high. So as I went through middle school and into high school, I kept hiding my emotions. I kept drinking. By the time I turned 16, it's okay to laugh at this photo. Who thought this guy would have trouble adjusting to high school? As I turned 16, I started experiencing symptoms of bipolar disorder. And it started off with me just not sleeping for 4 or 5 days in a row. My mind was constantly racing. And even though I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't tired. I felt invincible. I felt like I was on top of the world, nothing could stop me, nothing could bring me down. Then my moods would change. I get really angry, my moods would change. I couldn't have any energy or get out of bed. Because my mind was going through so much, I stopped just drinking occasionally and started solely drinking, binge drinking to the point of passing out. I never drank to hang out with people. I would drink a case of beer or a bottle of vodka or a bottle of rum and just pass out. My brother and a friend of the family noticed what was wrong. I went to a psychiatrist and he diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. But again, two very dangerous things happened before that diagnosis. Number one, I was hiding my feelings for now 5 years since the age of 11 and only making people laugh. And number two, I think the most dangerous thing, I learned to drink alcohol before I learned to talk about my feelings. So as I went through my junior year and into my senior year, that's what I did. I hid my emotions and I drank. And when I went into my senior year, I went into a really deep state of depression. And it started in September of my senior year with me just feeling really lonely. I felt like there was no one to talk to, no one would understand me. But even if there was somebody to talk to, I thought I should suck it up. I should deal with it on my own. If I couldn't, I must be weak. I always thought one day I'll wake up and this loneliness will just go away. But it didn't. In November of my senior year, I started having thoughts of death, thoughts of suicide. That built to the point where I was thinking about suicide and death 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But again, I didn't talk about it. For 2 months of my senior year, anytime I was in front of people at school, I put on my happy face. And I made everyone laugh. And I made everyone smile. And then I would go home, and I would either cry myself to sleep, or I wouldn't sleep at all. And I honestly believe that one day I would wake up, and I would just want to live again. That all of it would go away, that everything would be fine. And unfortunately, that day didn't come. And on January 5th of my senior year of high school, I was hospitalized for attempting to take my own life. And nothing happened that day. I went to school like I always did. I had a basketball game that night. I went to a restaurant with my friends to celebrate our victory after the game like we always did. And on the way home from that restaurant, I decided I no longer wanted to live. And what's really scary about that for me is that I didn't want to die. The people always ask me, but why would you try and kill yourself if you didn't want to die? I did not want to die. I just couldn't handle living the way I was living anymore, and taking my own life seemed like a way out of that pain. I thought if I took my own life, the thoughts would stop, and everyone else who I knew would be better off without me. It wasn't true, but that's the way I felt. So I came home from that restaurant, attempted to take my own life. I was rushed to the hospital. When I got to the hospital, they gave me a tranquilizer, and I woke up like 24 hours later. I woke up with no drawstrings in my sweatshirt, no shoelaces in my shoes, no sheets on my bed, and someone was watching me 24 hours a day. A couple days after that, we group therapy, and everyone in the hospital had to stand up and talk about why they were there. And the stories before mine were filled with, really traumatic things. When they came to me and they said, "Why are you here?" I really didn't know what to say. I was 17. I never imagined I'd be in a psychiatric ward. And they said, "Okay, if you don't know why you're here, can you at least tell us about your leg?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can do that. My name's Ross. I'm president of my class. I played varsity basketball for 3 years. I'm a member of SAD and peer helper. I volunteered 5 years for the Special Olympics. I attended the National Youth Leadership Forum in Washington, D.C. I have a 3.8 GPA, and I stopped. And I felt really stupid. Because the life I was describing was my external life. It was my college resume. It was everything that I was supposed to do. But my internal life was completely different. If I would have stood up and talked to my internal life, I would have said, "Hi, my name is Ross, and I hate myself. I hate myself so much, I'm willing to binge drink and drive, and I don't care what happens to me." And I didn't say that. And this part of my story is not even actually about me. It's about all of you. Because how many of you in your adult lives have an external life that everybody sees and an internal life that's different? How many of you put up defense mechanisms and fronts to make everyone think everything's okay? How many high school students do that? How many middle school students do that? But how long have you been using those fronts? How long have you been using those defense mechanisms to get into adulthood? Yeah, it starts in middle school and high school, but it just keeps building. It's really important to think about their own internal lives and how they can express them more. Because the longer you have that separation between an internal and external life, the higher chance you have of an explosion. I was in the hospital for a while. Eventually I got out and went back to high school. When I went back to high school, all of a sudden everything was different. Before I went to this hospital, I was a cool guy. I was a guy everyone partied with, everyone liked, everyone missed. When I got out of the hospital, everyone just started calling me a psycho and a crazy kid. I lost friends. I had rumors about me all through my small town. I had parents saying stuff about me. And 2 months after I got out of the hospital, a psychologist came into one of my classrooms to talk about the patients he was treating. And as he talked about those patients, every single student in that classroom started laughing. But I wasn't laughing. At that point, I'd been laughed at too much. And so I grabbed my teacher and I took him to the hallway and I said, hey, this isn't funny to me. And he looked down at me in a very tough love kind of way and he said, well, what do you want to do about it? And I said, let me speak. And he said, okay. And so 2 weeks later, I stood with that exact same classroom and I spoke for the very first time. And it didn't go as smoothly as this. I stood behind the podium and I shook and I sweated through my clothes. But when I finished my presentation, nobody laughed. And I learned at a really young age other people to sharing their story. Now it's April of my senior year and all I want to do is get as far away from Nazareth, Pennsylvania as I possibly can. My college acceptance letters came in. I chose to go to American University in Washington, D.C. And 2 months into my freshman year, I had a major relapse with bipolar disorder and had to come home. I took a year off from college. 3 semesters. I took another year off. In that whole time, I never stopped drinking. So by age 22, I decided to go back to American University. And on the outside, I looked amazing, but on the inside, I was more of a mess than I'd ever been. In that first semester back at American at age 22, one night I binge drank so much that I passed out for around 22 hours. And I woke up that night, and I looked in the mirror, and I was obviously crying. And I said to myself, all right, you're either going to continue this and you're going to die, or you're going to have to change. And that night at age 22 was the very first night of my life that I ever accepted having any of these issues. It was the first night that I was ever willing to say that all of this was real, which is really scary. I went through all that loss and change at 11 and 12. I was diagnosed at 16. I was hospitalized at 17, 18, and 19. It wasn't until I was 22 where I was like, this is actually real. Acceptance is a very critical part, but I really hated myself. And because I hated myself so much, I couldn't get treatment or diagnosis because I wasn't even willing to try to get better. So the first thing I had to learn to do was like myself. Once I learned to like myself, then of course I needed treatment and therapy. Some of the most effective treatments out there are some combination of medication with some level of therapy. I think the most important thing I learned in my recovery was I never chose to have bipolar disorder, but I could choose to change the way I cope with it. I could stop hiding. I could stop drinking. I could start finding ways to express myself authentically to my therapist, my friends, my family. I could start finding other outlets for my emotions like exercise and music and all kinds of other things to release them. Eventually I graduated from American University. I went into this fancy career you heard about, and I still work on my mental health every day. I joke with people that adulthood is often just like undoing adolescence. I came from a lot of trauma, and I came from a really difficult home environment that wasn't even intentional. My parents loved me more than anything in their world, and I'm still trying to undo a lot of those gaps in my own marriage, in my own life. And so as we look at these mental health journeys, I do have some things that I think are really helpful. The factors that are most important for recovery, one is acceptance. If you have a son or daughter, family member, anyone in your life who will not accept that they have a problem, it's really hard for them to move forward. It doesn't matter what that problem is. It doesn't matter if the problem is they don't clean their room, or if their problem is that they actually have bipolar disorder or addiction. Acceptance has to be a key element. What you can do to help someone accept that they have it is compare mental health to physical health, is help them see that their behavior is clearly changed, that behavior is harming themselves. But acceptance really has to be the first piece. Self-awareness is critical because as you're going through all of these emotional changes, you need to be aware of what it's doing to you. I needed to become aware that binge drinking was destroying my life. I needed to become aware that my reactions and my emotions and my feelings had impact on other people. Discipline in any health disorder is important. If you're on medication, if you're in treatment, if you have a treatment plan, you need to have the discipline to follow it. And then responsibility is also a critical element in any mental health or physical health disorder. If you have diabetes and you're taking insulin, but you're also eating endless amounts of sugar, you're gonna lose parts of your body, you're gonna die. If you're on medication for a problem with your heart and you eat cheeseburgers, cheesesteaks, french fries, drink alcohol, and smoke cigarettes, you're going to run the risk of dying a lot sooner. If you're on medication for a mental health disorder and you continue to drink or do drugs or not talk about your emotions or not follow some kind of treatment protocol, you're not going to have a lot of success. Physical health disorders are one thing. Mental health disorders often strip people of their ability to do these four things as just the nature of the symptoms of the disorders. So it's not easy to achieve these things, but they are the most important things. Some tips I always give parents are, the first thing is you have to educate yourself. Now you can read a lot of books about mental health, but I think the most important education is in understanding your family. I was 27 when I asked my parents if anyone else in our family had mental health issues. And about 35 minutes later, both of them finished mentioning everyone in our family who either had addiction, anxiety, or depression. If you know that people in your family have any mental health disorders, your kids, your nephews, your nieces, your brothers, your sisters, all of them are much higher at risk of developing those same disorders. If you educate yourself and have honest conversations with your kids, it may delay their chance of having that first drink or that first drug. It may also help you spot warning signs earlier because you're much more aware that it's in your family. We can be preventative through education as long as we're willing to be honest about what's happening in our family. The next piece is trying to turn confrontation into conversation. So almost every home that has an adolescent in it is filled with confrontation. They want autonomy, they want to be on their own, they also want you to pay for everything, but they are also fine being independent. And that creates a lot of confrontation. Turning confrontation into conversation is an approach where instead of it, like you having these charged defense mechanisms, you try to lessen those. I always tell students their longest neural pathways are with their families, and no one can trigger them as quickly as their families. For all that, whatever you went through as a kid. And so turning confrontation into conversation requires a system where you try and change those patterns of conflict. Where you try and have a moment where you step outside of yourself and say, hey, we keep doing this. We keep ending up in the same place. How can we make this different? Walking the line between empowering and enabling, man, that's a line that's so different for every kid and every adult and every person in this room that no one can just quickly navigate it. When I got home from American University when I was 18 and got out of the psychiatric ward, I was sleeping on my couch for like 16 hours a day. I was on a lot of medication. And my mom came to me and she was like, you need to get a job. You can't just lay here every day. let this thing control you. And I hated it. I hated her. I got a job, I think I worked at Red Lobster, like rolling silverware, which was something I never imagined doing. And as I look back on it, it did teach me that I could do something. That I could get involved in it, even in my worst state. When you have kids who have mental health disorders, it's scary. One, you want to fix their pain, so you're not sure how to fix it. And two, you want them to be okay. And that's where parents really struggle to navigate that line between empowering and enabling. And I can't say that what you do is right or wrong, and I can't just speak to it, but it exists. And if you empower them, they might see those steps. But if you enable them, they may never see those steps. And those steps are indefinable too. I can't make that easier. If you really want to open a conversation with your kids, it's important to make them the expert on the issue you want to talk about. So here's an example. You're worried that your kid games too much, watches porn on their phone, whatever it is. If you approach them and you say, hey, you're gaming too much, do you watch porn? That conversation is not going to go anywhere. But if you sit down with them and you say, I'm reading a lot about whatever topic you want to discuss, and you ask them, do you see this? Kids love to be the expert. So they can talk to you endlessly about what they see, and what is happening, and what's going on in their school. And then, if you switch it to, are you involved in any of this? Or how do you feel about this? It's a much easier inroad to that conversation than are you doing this? Let them share what they do know, what they do see. Let them know that you know these things are happening, and then have that conversation. Leave the door open. My dad used to tell the most gut-wrenching story where I never talked to my parents about my emotions. And he got to a point where he was like, hey, if you ever do want to talk, I'm here for you. And he used to tell this story where he would stay up every night until he knew I got home, or I called and said I was somewhere. But he got to a point where he knew that I was struggling so much that he was prepared for me to not come in. For the knock on the door to be the state police. Or for a phone call to be that I was gone. And obviously as a parent, like that's the most devastating thing or state you can be in, but there are millions of parents in that place right now. And sometimes if your kid is as stubborn as I was, and as unaware as I was, and as shut down as I was, it's all you can do. To say, hey, that door is open to you if you need it. And the one thing that both of my parents always tried to do was to take care of themselves, to try and maintain their relationship, and to try and maintain their own mental health. When we were struggling in our worst moments, they did take time away to maintain themselves. Because much like that oxygen mask, if they didn't, they could have never been there for us when we did need it. So my family went through a lot of really difficult times. My oldest brother left our family entirely from when I was 16 until I was 23 because he felt like he wasn't emotionally supported. My parents had to learn a lot of different skills. By the time I was around 25 or 26, we were all talking again. My middle brother never had a diagnosable mental health disorder. He was like a really supreme athlete, went to the NFL combines, and I think having athletics as his release during all of this shit stuff was helpful for him. And, you know, by the end of my dad's life, which again was only 2 years ago, we are a much more functional family. We don't always get along. I'm much closer to my middle brother than my oldest brother, partly because he left for 7 years. But my oldest brother lives close to me. We see each other all the time. And I think the only thing that really helped our family was everyone being willing to grow and admit we didn't know what to do. No one of us brought the family back together, but all of us had to admit where we were wrong and what we could try and build. And I think those are the most important things that I can stress for families. But really what this comes down to is how you cope. So I always like to take the last couple minutes to talk about coping. All of you in this room cope every single day with your friends, your family, your jobs, your finances, your future, your worries. Your kids cope with similar things. The concept that I like to talk about is this is a synapse in a brain. This synapse sends messages. The more often a synapse sends a message, the more automatic people's actions become. So if you look at the world's best athletes, these are people who played a sport so long that they've wired their brains to just react to certain situations. There are a lot of studies that show even the world's top athletes, if they think about the action they're about to take at the end of the game, they will choke. But if they just react, they'll thrive. Musicians wire their brains to learn how to play music. Your kids wire their brains with video games, with social media, with walking and talking and driving, and every activity you have has a neural pathway. The one thing that separates humans from pretty much every other species is that our brains are so plastic we can learn all kinds of new behaviors and new skills, and that is a powerful process of the brain. But it also has a downside. Because I started drinking alcohol when I was 12, and because I binge drank for every emotional trigger from 16 to 22, the more I practiced that, the better I got at it. The more you use a coping mechanism, the more automatic those neural pathways become. The deeper those neural pathways get, the harder it is to change them. So the same brain that can give us these powers can also be destructive if the coping mechanisms we use are ineffective. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that coping starts well before we're aware of what coping is. Coping starts this early. When people are crying because they want to be fed hell or change, they're coping. Some people stuff their thumbs, some people have blankets, some people have stuffed animals. At a certain age, emotions start coming out. I hope this girl got what she wanted. She's real mad. But as soon as emotions start coming out, what we try to do is distract kids. We put them in front of screens. And this is where we really have to decide which coping mechanisms are effective and which are ineffective. Some of you watch TV for an hour or two and zone out. Some people Netflix binge a 4-day weekend and then resurface. The coping mechanisms that are most likely to develop at a young age are eating, shopping, gaming. At some point, people might start listening to music. In middle school, people might start drawing or doing art or playing a sport or reading. But by the time they become teenagers, coping changes. Some people drink alcohol, some people smoke weed, some people abuse prescription drugs, some people just isolate themselves. And their coping isn't inaction, it's a lack of action. There's a really fascinating neuroscience study called Why You Never Really Leave High School. It's not the feel-good study of the year, but it's interesting. What they found is that the coping mechanisms that people develop between the ages of 12 and 25 often last for the rest of their life unless they actively change them. And they interview people in their 50s and 60s and put them in a work environment. And when they put people in that work environment, they immediately snap back to who they were in high school. With clicks, with their image of themselves, with how they interacted in the world. And it makes sense. Your first experiences with loss, change, and rejection happen in middle school and high school. How you code that in your brain, how you code your self-image, your self-talk, all of those things carries on unless you actively change it. And the steps to change it are pretty clear. Number one, you have to want to. No one can make you do it. Number two, you have to have that self-awareness to identify the behavior you want to change as you're doing the behavior. Number three, you have to replace that coping mechanism with a different coping mechanism. And number four, you have to practice that coping mechanism until you become the Serena Williams of the coping mechanism. A lot of people say you can change a habit in 30 days. That's a very cool story. We're not talking about habits. We're talking about coping mechanisms that have a biological, environmental, and life influence. And the last step is having an environment that supports you and allows you to change. So the last thing I want to talk about before we open to the questions is, I focused heavily tonight on building your brain. You do have the opportunity to build your brain all the way up into your 80s and 90s, the rest of your life. The brain's not static, it's plastic. And the one part of my story that I often share that I think drives this home is really important. When I I turned 21 years old, my parents took me out for a birthday dinner. Pretty standard birthday dinner. We sat down, we ordered appetizers, waiter walked away. And then my parents started crying. And that was not standard. My parents didn't cry a lot. My mom still to this day never cries. I'd only ever seen my dad cry one day before this, when I was 21. And so I was really confused because it's my birthday. And I looked at my parents, and my dad looked back at me through, was kind of like choked up, just like bawling, deep breaths, and he said, "We didn't think you would live to be 21." And I gave my parents a lot of reasons to not think that I would live to be 21, but I did. I can't tell you how many hands I've held, how many people I've hugged, how many tears I've seen from friends and family members who had someone who didn't make it to be 21. We lost my cousin 3 years ago to an accidental overdose of opiates. I think the most devastating thing about life is that you only get one chance. You only have one life. And this is it. And everyone in this room spends most of their day going through a checklist of things you have to do every day until you get to your own place of comfort, until you get to your own place. A place of comfort for you could be a person, something. It could be your religious or spiritual practice. No place of comfort. I want you to really think about your internal life, about what you haven't expressed and what you haven't shared. And then I want you to find a way to share it. One of the most powerful things you can do as a parent and as a person and as a family member is to share your story. When I shared my story in a basement classroom in Nazareth, Pennsylvania at 17, I could have never imagined I would end up speaking to millions of people and creating curriculum and writing books and creating a school and actively trying to change the way that all kids learn about mental health. But I got there by sharing my story. I got here by sharing my story. To change mental health, you have to embrace that power. It takes more strength to talk about this than it does to hide it. It takes more strength to uncover your family and these mental health secrets than it does to bury it. So tonight, I shared with you my story. After this, is that at some point in your life, you find the strength to share your own story. Because you have no idea where your story will lead you until you tell it. Thank you very much. Questions. I believe the policy is you will come up here and ask the question because we're live streaming, which is super cool. And then I'll answer the question after you ask it at the microphone. So don't just raise your hand. Come down and ask very comfortably at the microphone. I'll just repeat the question. I was going to offer that, but I just wanted to see if anyone would actually come to the microphone. So you can stay seated. I'll just repeat the question. No questions? Cool. I'll just no. Just kidding.
Thoughts on medication.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. So thoughts on medication. I'll try and keep this brief. The most effective treatment for mental health disorders we know is some combination of medication with some combination of therapy. I am still in treatment. I never share what my specific treatment is because my journey is not to tell everyone to do what I do. And early on, I used to go specific, like I was on this dose and this medication, and I was shocked after the presentation how many people would be like, that's what I need to do. So I don't do that anymore because it's not appropriate. Medications have been in a certain percentage of the population. The very earliest descriptions of mental health disorders were that they were chemical imbalances. And so it made sense that serotonin or dopamine or other things could help balance those chemicals. The current definition of mental health disorders is not that they're chemical imbalances at all. Is that there are neural pathways involved in every single kind of mental health disorder, and depending on what the neural pathway is, medications can either help improve those connections or not improve them at all. My recommendation for anyone who takes psychiatric medication is to educate yourself on what that medication does, but to also supplement it with a change in your behavior in some way. The reason when I was speaking, I talked about if you take heart medication for your heart or your blood pressure, but you don't change your behavior, you're going to die. If you take medication for your brain and you don't change anything else, it's not going to be as effective. But the main reason, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this, that psychiatric is because health insurance plans do not cover therapy, and the pharmaceutical lobby is much larger in DC than the patient lobby for changing healthcare to cover mental health. President Bush in 2006 formed a huge bipartisan commission and passed the Mental Health Equity Act. And that act was supposed to require insurance companies to treat mental health and physical health the same, so that your copay for a therapist would be the same as your copay for a doctor. And everyone celebrated it. It was maybe one of the few bipartisan things this country's done in the last 20 years. Once it passed, Congress did not fund it. So the insurance companies weren't required to do it. When the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010, they tried it again. And they required insurance companies to treat mental health like physical health, but nobody funded it. And the reason that Congress will never fund it is because the insurance and pharmaceutical lobbies are much more powerful than people standing up and saying what's happening. Because of the shame and embarrassment and stigma of people rising up and saying, I want mental health care, it doesn't happen. So yes, you should be careful about what medications you take. You should educate yourself. You should try other things. But if we really want to see mental health care expand, we have to actually raise our voices and ask people to change it. It's on the books, it's just not funded. And I think part of the reason was, for all parties involved, it looked great to say we were funding mental health, but they didn't have to follow through. And that's everybody. I'm not like choosing any sides here. Like I said, it was a big bipartisan push, but it just never got funded. So as an individual, educate yourself, do other things. If you really want this to change from an insurance perspective, we have to speak up about it. Any other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now with the advent of teledoctors, and the fact that you can probably get the same person, and it is a conversation, and what are your thoughts on that, and what are your advice on how to find it there?
So the question is, can people find good therapists? We constantly hear like it's hard to do it. And then with the rise of telepsychology, basically, is it more? If people find a connection, it's great. I do agree that it's hard to find a good therapist. If you, let's say you're in Los Angeles and you have a mental health problem, and you have millions of dollars, you may not be able to find a therapist who has an open slot to actually talk to you. And so then you might need to find a social worker or someone else who can't match what you need. This advent of telepsychology, I think, can be good if it's effective for people. I'll be honest with you. I follow some therapists on Instagram, and there are times where I learn more from just their little meme than I have in my therapy. Because they said something that just made sense that I didn't think about in a different way. So I think it's important to try everything we can, but I do think our bodies trap a lot of our emotions, and one of the reasons it's hard to find a good therapist is because we're not releasing the emotions everywhere we need to. We're not taking care of our physical health, we're putting everything in our mental health, and there has to be a balance of both. But it is really difficult to and then it takes so many visits to just get some kind of rapport with them that it's harder to build it up. It's not impossible. I think everyone should exhaust all resources in finding what works for them. I have a lot of friends who have found a lot of success in telepsychology and other things like that, but it's because the person they were calling matched up with them. None of that is covered by health insurance. not even remotely. You can't even, there's some that's free for, so let me back that up. Some telepsychology is free for veterans and covered by veteran health policies. If it's a licensed professional that's doing telepsychology, some of it is covered. What I am referring to is there's a lot of people who are not using their licenses when they do telepsychology, and then it's just all out of pocket. So some of it is really effective and covered. But when you're dealing with people who either aren't using their licenses or don't have licenses, and they're doing that telepsychology, like they're coaches and stuff. Okay. Versus that just, there's a really great organization called Give an Hour, where psychologists around the country give free hours to help that. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess my question is, in your travels kind of the mental health world, I'm wondering if there is anyone really seriously talking about nutritional component, and so you've run across anecdotal stories where a food allergy could potentially manifest itself in what would be a diagnosable psychiatric disorder.
Yeah.
So I guess, I'm just interested to hear if you have any experience with these things or what the state of.
Sure, and just to clarify, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual is the book that all mental health professionals use to diagnose individuals with mental health disorders. When the Diagnostic Statistics Manual version 5 was released a couple years ago, the American Psychiatric Association approved it for psychiatrists to diagnose people. The National Institute of Mental Health, which is the government-funded agency that oversees all mental health research, does not agree with the Diagnostic Statistics Manual version 5. And the reason they don't is that they felt like the symptoms were too vague, and they felt that it wasn't leading to a theory that was backing up the evidence of the neural pathway manifestation of mental health disorders. So the Diagnostic Statistics Manual supports a theory of more like chemical imbalance versus neural pathway. The tricky thing is you need chemicals to create neurons. So it's not like they're so far apart. In terms of what you're saying, there are a lot of studies, and not even anecdotal, but evidence-based studies showing that changing nutritional habits can change the brain. There are schools that stop serving soda and sugar and have kids who all have ADHD and their behavioral issues have lessened almost to the point where they don't have the same symptoms they had. And so when we talk about diet and the amount of like preservatives and everything else that are in our everyday food, hormones, all kinds of stuff, it can definitely affect your mental health. And there are a lot of evidence-based studies being done all over the country that show that. If you have a food allergy to gluten or whatever else it is, you can actually manifest anxiety disorders, all kinds of things, just based off of what that food allergy is doing to you. So it's not even anecdotal. There's a lot of evidence-based data that shows.
I want to thank you all for the and again, we wish you the best.
Got your phones. If you just text mine. So yeah, if you just text my